Our children and young people services consist of two service lines basically. They're inpatient services and community services. The inpatient services are commissioned by NHS England and their national services, and our community services are commissioned by local CCGs, so the 6 CCGs in our area. So we provide children and young people services to everybody up to the age of 18 for any mental health problems that they may have, and that includes young people with learning disability as well. The reason we bought the project was because we had a number of issues in our services around waiting times and around our capacity to meet current demand. There's a national problem with children and young people services around demand and capacity. We're no different to anybody else. We were experiencing some significant problems in relation to building waiting times.
I think there was a clear need for change. And it was felt that maybe things weren't working as well as they should be, and I think the service felt that there was, a little bit extra support needed.
But once I did become on board, what I wanted to get out of it was more streamlined services and more clear pathways and roles and responsibilities for staff.
What I would say is that the services were good. We'd already received an outstanding rating from CQC, so quality-wise services were as good as they could be, really. I think where we had concerns was around, as I said earlier, the increasing demand and whether we were using our capacity in the right way. So I think there was lots of inefficiency in the system, even though the people who were in the system were getting a good deal, they were getting a good service. Our waiting lists were building, therefore there was a lot of people that weren't getting into our service, and we needed to make sure that we were being as efficient as we could be, and I think that was in doubt at the time.
Meridian was first introduced because we had two very separate parts of the service. We had an ADHD part of the service and an ASD part. We were looking at combining both areas from a productivity point of view due to the fact that there's so much crossover between the assessments.
We had 4 new managers in post, and the roles and responsibilities weren't particularly streamlined or clear as to what they should be. They were very clinically focused, which isn't a bad thing, but that meant that operationally they weren't that focused on what the operational side of the job should be.
I think one of the biggest advantages of the Meridian process was the fact that it was very, very time limited, whereas beforehand it would be that we would sit and discuss the best way to move forward, and we'd have several discussions on that and very little would get pushed forward. Whereas with Meridian, it was very, very clear from the very start that once we had those conversations and those decisions had been reached, we would actually follow through.
When the project first came into play, I think it would be fair to say there was lots of scepticism about bringing in an external company to examine our services. Obviously, staff get very anxious when people are being observed in their daily work, etc., etc. So there was some anxiety around, but I think that the team worked very hard with staff to try and overcome that anxiety. And I think once people realised that it wasn't to berate anybody, but it was to make services better, people started to engage in the process.
Initially, there was that level of suspicion as to why you were there and what you were doing and kind of why you're looking at me. That changed to the middle part where they got quite irritable with kind of the process. They were quite angry. It was almost like you were accusing them of not doing their job. But now what we have is very content staff. They're very contained, I suppose, with having the boundaries in place as to what's expected.
I suppose we didn't know what you were going to be asking for, but in terms of what we wanted out of it was to know where the services were currently at in terms of capacity, in terms of how effective they were, how efficient they were, and the project certainly delivered on that. I suppose the general feel about it, whilst the management had their thoughts about it, I think probably the team managers felt quite pressured. I think they felt it a real challenge in terms of the amount of data and the requests for information that came through. And certainly the clinical staff felt pretty uncomfortable at times with the transparency that it required around their practice as well. But however, that all helped us to find out what kind of capacity and and how effective and efficient we were working.
But these things are hard work. When we got into the level of detail that we did, it required a lot of work and the data collection and observations of staff. So I think there was a lot of tensions around, and it was difficult for staff at first. But I think the benefits are tenfold. Now that we understand what's happening in our services, it allows us to plan better going forward. And I think now, if I was to ask the staff now, they would say that things are better, much better than they were before.
I think the Meridian team's attitude from all of the staff that I met was absolutely fine. Very polite, at times very easy to work with. It's always difficult for anybody coming in and trying to embed change that maybe staff and managers alike aren't fully aware of. And the support that they gave was absolutely great, and you could see it going from strength to strength as we worked through the stage. It's helped me as a manager understand team capacity, individual staff capacity, and how to measure that.
For your managers, your on the floor managers, to sort of say that there are going to be lots of demands for data and information requests, and they're going to be rapid, and they're going to be required within set time frames.
I think what the service has gained is things are more streamlined now. It's very, very clear what the manager's job is, what their roles and responsibilities are. It's much more operationally focused. We'll have clear teams, clear pathways within the teams, and what's happened is the teams have really taken responsibility and ownership of the service, where beforehand, when it was a bit chaotic, I suppose they didn't have that clear leadership, which led them everybody doing different things, whereas now everybody's very clear on what's expected.
I know on a Monday that when I look at the staff's weekly report that I handed in on a Friday, when I pulled all of that together and collated all of the rationales for DNAs, cancelled on our behalf, and other factors like the variances, when I put all of that together and I submit my management report, it gives me a really good snapshot of how the team's performing the week before, and then it helps me work with the week ahead with the projections that they've also submitted. So I know if that staff are down on the contracts or something, I know that this week we've got a plan to get that back up, so it just seems to balance itself out.
The service has gained a lot from the project. We always were a high quality service, and I think we've managed to maintain that. But what we've done now is put systems and processes in place which allow us to examine activity on a daily basis, make sure that workload's pretty evenly spread, that people aren't stressed with huge caseloads, and that we're using our staff as efficiently as we possibly can. I'm now able to report to the board exactly what the services are doing on a day-to-day basis if need be.
What we have now is very happy managers. They are very clear on what their roles are. They know what every member of their staff are doing at any point in the day, where beforehand that wasn't really clear. And the proof's in the pudding. Our performance has increased quite dramatically over the last few months. And I think that is down to staff and managers being clear on what their roles and responsibilities are, having clear guidelines and pathways, and in turn they've really taken ownership of the service, and what you have is the goodwill returning to the service, which you kind of lost before in the chaos.
I definitely think these changes in terms of the new alignments of teams, and the specific structures and what each team does with the pathway that is embedded. I really do think it gives focus. I think it gives staff identity, it gives the team's identity, and I think all of that was maybe missing for this process.
I think what we gained from it is a greater knowledge and a more accurate knowledge around our capacity and our activity levels within the services, which is what we wanted. I think what it also did was show us where we could release capacity as well, which again helps us to work more efficiently and effectively.
I think some of the systems have been really beneficial in the fact of being able to collect proper data that means something. That for me has probably been the strongest point of this whole exercise. It's all very well saying that we've got a capacity issue, but then to be able to demonstrate it with facts and figures means a lot to me as a manager. I can actually then turn and say, okay, well, these are the facts. Okay, this is how many staff we've got, this is how many patients we can see over this time frame.
One of the things we did as part of the project was actually restructure the teams into different types of teams. A lot of the staff are reporting that they feel that the new team structures are much better, and it's using people's skills much better than we did before. So they're getting there, and it's working pretty well.
Before, the waiting list has come down, although the referral rate's still the same, the referral rate has remained the same, the waiting list itself has gone down, because what we have is weekly team meetings where all the staff attend, and because they feel very part of the service now, you know, they're not just being allocated things, they are part of that team who sit there, listen to what referrals have come in, and taking the ownership of saying, actually, that sounds like something I would really like to work with. I'm already at my capacity, but I can see that one really quickly, so give that one to me. So actually the treatment waiting list has gone down, and we're on track to be hitting our targets by the end of the quarter. So that, I'm keeping my fingers and arms and toes crossed for that.
The manager has, you know, that handle and oversight and ability to kind of make use of the staff members' time more efficiently. And I think, we couldn't necessarily see it at the beginning, but now, when you would mention, and when we were meeting and stuff about, if staff have got DNAs and then they've got space, and then you look at your waiting list and you filter in and stuff, it works really well.
Well, I feel confident in our data now. I was struggling with that beforehand. Now I feel able to understand, if you like, what's going on in the service at any one time. I feel confident now that we've got a strategy around our workforce, so we now better understand what we need going forward in relation to workforce needs. So when it comes to things like recruitment and selection, we know what we need going forward, so I feel much more comfortable with our recruitment processes. I think our supervision systems are much more robust now, and it's not just about clinical supervision, it's about caseload supervision. So managers are using a framework that I feel more confident with, that's more robust, and it's based on an agreed framework basically, so things are looking a lot brighter. I think this type of project it focuses the mind, if you like, of the people that are involved in it on what needs to be focused on. This was all based upon patient needs, about skill sets, and about making sure that the work was distributed fairly across the teams. Those are always important things. It doesn't matter what type of service you provide. So where there are issues around bottlenecks or waiting lists or services not functioning very well, this type of project can only benefit the system, really.
As with any change process, it takes time to embed, and that's something that for any project needs to be built in to the project timeline, and it has to be realistic. We're asking people to change ethos, we're asking them to change their practices, the way they work. You're asking them to come out of their comfort zone. That doesn't happen overnight, and that will take time, and I think that needs to be vectored in, particularly by the organisation you work for, and be supported and allowing staff to do that.
I probably would have discussed the project more with the teams before we actually engaged in the work, so I think preparation is good, but also keep focused on what the project's about. Make sure that you make it clear that this is about improving patient experience, and most staff will engage with that.
I think there's a number of things. I think having the clear systems and processes is one thing. It means, I think looking back now, whether the suspicion was there, well, that's saying that we're not doing our job. The proof is in the pudding. Actually, we've never said you're not doing your job. Your job hasn't changed. And I said that a million times during the process. Your job's not going to change. But nobody believes that when they're going through a process like this. So now they're at the other end, they can see that the job itself hasn't changed. It's the mentality and the kind of thinking around it that's changed. I do think it's the ownership that's the biggest thing. The suspicion's gone, so they put the contacts in on time because they've realised that actually it's not a microscope kind of process. They see the benefits in it. And then having that team meeting process is really, really helpful.
Allocate timeframes to certain aspects of the work, That's helped us to standardise what we do, but also put us in quite a strong position for negotiating with commissioners around service specifications and what our service can provide and perhaps what it can't provide, because it helps us to cost out what each element of the service is as well.
As the project itself worked well, we may be able to overcome some of the anxieties that we had earlier on if we had a better lead into that. So that would be my advice.
To allow yourself to be open to change, to really listen, to really take on board what these specialists are saying, and to start with a positive outlook that this is going to achieve a greater goal. Just listen for this process, and I think we're seeing it now, and I'm sure all those would agree. Since the process, since the Meridian work stopped and we've taken ownership of it, and the cycles of change that we've been through, I think at the moment it's probably the strongest it's been within 6.
I think children's services for quite some time now have been under the microscope, both nationally and internally. As our trust board were examining what we were doing very closely. So there's a lot of pressure on services. But I think now that the systems have been put in place that allows the team to understand themselves what's happening, I think that's been really helpful to them to manage their own throughput, to manage their own demand and capacity issues in a way that they couldn't before. Really.
You can see it week by week, and it's just going from strength to strength. And I think senior managers and everything now are able to get a really accurate account of just what these teams and the staff within the teams are actually doing.
Working with Meridian was actually very different from other projects that I've been involved with throughout my time in the NHS. And one of the things that was noticeable was the pace. Things happened very quickly. There was a big push for information to be collected and collated very quickly, and how we could utilise that information and make improvements and changes to service delivery.
But honestly, it's a different place now, really different place.
From a learning point of view, I think Meridian's been very successful in helping us get from point A to point B. And for that, I would definitely work with Meridian again.
Absolutely. If I was given another opportunity, I would work with Meridian again.
The conversation is there and they feel much more valued. Of course, when you've got valued staff, you get more productivity out of it. It's a lovely place now. Love it.